Welcome to the GSMC Pets Podcast, the show that caters to pet lovers of all kinds. We'll talk about pets on social media, pets doing amazing things, and how to take care of the pets in your life. Whether your pet is a dog, a cat, a llama, hamster, reptile, or something more exotic, you'll find educational and entertaining information on the GSMC Pets Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Pets Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sam, and I don't know where Ison is. He's probably hanging out behind the dryer or something. That's one of his favorite places to go to. But maybe he will just pop up randomly and he'll have something to say about our topic today, which... well, let's keep it relevant. It's, July 4th time, get all the fireworks and, a lot of lost dogs, which is unfortunate, but there are ways that you can find your dog. Make sure they're microchipped, even your cats too. But that is one side of what I want to talk about. Just to kind of add a little bit of fun to this, why don't we talk about the pets of the Revolutionary War, actually. And when I say this, it's almost like the presidential pets episode, but we're just going to focus on, specific, people and pets. For instance, George Washington had many, many animals, and so did, who was that? Oh, Teddy Roosevelt, right? But anyway, it's 4th of July as I'm recording this, and I figured let's talk about some of our pet heroes from the American Revolutionary War. So, here's where we're going to get started. Well, of course, I just mentioned him, George Washington. So, first of all, I just want to go ahead and say that George Washington loved dogs. But, and there's always a but to this, he, of course, owned slaves, and he would also breed his own dogs too. But whenever a slave's dog approached him, he always seemed to find it very uncomfortable. So at some point he decided to basically get rid of the dogs. I'll leave you to your imagination on that. But yeah, he had plenty of dogs, just he could not stand the slaves having dogs. So that is one major thing that I have to say before I continue on. Just, there are there are multiple sides of the story, and it's great that you guys would like to do further research on it. Now, back to, George Washington and his overall, kindness to animals, or maybe I should just say the facade of it, but, yeah, it says over here that George Washington actually had dozens of dogs of many, many different breeds. And of course, he would start breeding his own dogs, making some hybrids of them. Just, he wanted to honestly keep his animals to himself, it seems, but also making a little bit of cash on the side by, breeding dogs. But, just kind of, one thing that he's very well known for is his hunting dogs, and, he had different ways of recording how many dogs he had, and it's pretty crazy how much. And, there's this one note over here that he probably had about 50 or more dogs during his lifetime. Whoa, right? Oh my gosh, that's pretty intense. But when you look at the rest of, specifically in the American Revolution, you can see more mentions of George Washington's dogs. And, he was as I said, a lifelong dog lover. And he basically had, like, let me give you a list of some dog names. Let's just start with that. So, starting from the first one, starting from the top. Captain, Duchess, Drunkard, Juno, Jupiter, Pilot, Rover, Searcher, Sweet Lips, True Love, Taster, and Tippler, and then Vulcan. So, all of those names belong to those dogs, pretty much. And what tickles me so much is a Drunkard and Sweet Lips. I don't even know what to think of that, honestly. But just gonna continue on this. Like, one of his favorite dogs was actually Sweet Lips, and Sweet Lips was an American staghound, basically kind of like a hunting dog, and he honestly, like, really showed some favoritism to this dog, and he would take the dog on, like, trips to Philadelphia, and also he took this dog into battle as well, which is pretty interesting, to be honest, and I just kind of wish that there was more information on this, because, well, I mean, to some extent, animal companions during war seem to be ignored for the most part, or not really given much much light to them. So, honestly, this article that I'm looking at right now is definitely a good sign of people starting to acknowledge the additional help that was provided by particularly dogs. Now, including all of that, there were other things that, kind of set George Washington apart. And, well, there's this story about General Howe, a British soldier, and he lost his dog during a battle, honestly. And just, it was how the battle started was, like, blanketed by extreme fog, and honestly, they should have not attacked, because, well, there were people that got lost. It was complete chaos. But, I mean, one thing that happened was that Howe lost his dog in the entire chaos, and somehow this dog, like, was found by George Washington. And then, for one thing, he was going to be honest. He was going to return this dog to the owner. Fantastic. Love George Washington to some extent. However, there were other soldiers that was like, oh, we should keep this dog as a trophy. And in my head, I'm thinking, what? How dare you? And George Washington was kind of in line with me, though he probably wasn't as outreach, but it's said that he was basically keeping his honor by giving the dog back to him, and just kind of like the showcasing honor and showcasing, like, just human decency, pretty much. So, he delivered the return of the pet to Howe under a flag of truce. And there are actually a lot of back and forth in, like, why George Washington did this. And, well, either, and this is what some historians say, some historians view it as an active display of Washington's honor, but others contend that it was a shrewd tactic, and I'm quoting that. So, after all, the messenger who delivered the dog to Howe would have had a very unique opportunity to spy a bit on the British headquarters. So, there was a suggested tactical action to this, which, hey, I don't know if it actually, was that, and it's still probably going to be up in the air for as long as I live, honestly. But looking at the presence of dogs was, pretty important. I mean, you can think back to Woodstick, the bear during World War II, and he was a great boost of morale for the soldiers. And I imagine that simply having these dogs around were definitely very much so morale boosting. But even outside of the American Revolution, I mean, George Washington, as I said, was a breeder, and he actually created an original breed that actually still exists today, and that is the American Foxhound. So he had received like a gift of several French foxhounds in like Grand Bleu de Gascogne from, well, Marquis de Lafayette. And as of right now, I'm kind of putting a picture in my head of the Hamilton, that particular group of performers, and it's just, I just watched it maybe like an hour ago. But anyway, just, he got a gift of like French foxhounds, and then he decided to kind of crossbreed it with his English foxhounds. So apparently it was like the ultimate hunting breed, but I don't know. I wouldn't do any kind of judging on that. Just take their word for it. But the dog breed was actually recognized by the American Kennel Club in 1886, and its official state dog, it is the official state dog of Virginia, which is pretty nifty, actually. And it's just kind of interesting imagining the founding father, or one of the founding fathers, as a breeder. I mean, let's just face it, a lot of our history lessons focus on the stories of the people that win, basically. And, I mean, sure, it's not really the same as comparing George Washington to the foxhounds, to be honest. But there was a lot of animals in with him when he moved to the White House, but before then it was before like the War of 1812. It was actually not a White House; it was just strictly wood. Derailing the conversation here, but in the War of 1812, which was kind of like a continuation of the American Revolution, kind of. The White House was, just straight up wood, and it was burned down by British invaders. It's kind of amazing how terrible accidents can actually leave a very much so permanent mark in history, just with the burning of Washington, D.C. But as for like George Washington and his dogs, I imagine that it was kind of a crazy kind of environment. But hey, I'm just trying to think of like, what would this White House look like at the time of George Washington living there? And, well, I know that this is a pets podcast, but I mean, history is very interesting. But again, back to the dogs. I know that I would absolutely love to meet Sweet Lips because, well, it just got sweet lips. Now, I do think that as I said, there was a lot of problems. It was problematic of George Washington to basically be afraid of slaves' dogs, because he probably felt like those dogs could go after him quite easily and potentially kill him. But it's just, I feel like there was like maybe another way that he could have done this. Maybe not by killing the dogs. So again, there's a lot of problematic behaviors that George Washington had. I'm not going to get into too much of it. I'm hoping that maybe a history podcast opens up or something so we can actually really delve into that. But yeah, it's interesting to see how the world kind of unfurled because of the presence of dogs in the military. And again, you see that with German Shepherds, particularly in the army, and then also with the police officers. So I mean, it could be, I imagine history would have been quite different, morale boost wise, and I wouldn't say like sneaky behavior, but just training those dogs to be especially careful with what is, with the environment, and being well trained to do what needs to be done. And I find that very impressive because, Regina is doing well with her training. Cookie is just not going to try. But I have gotten her to stop, like, barreling out of the door and of the house and she just starts barking at the air. And there's I'm sorry, this is such a derailment, but, Cookie would definitely run over to our gate, and she would start barking at this lawn ornament that was basically a ceramic dog, and she would just go crazy. Like, the only time that I have been able to keep her from barking is by standing right in front of her at the door and letting her just kind of guide herself out of that need to bark. So she's gotten quieter. That's a plus, right? But anyway, I just can't understand why George Washington would do that to dogs, especially if he claims to be a dog lover. I mean, come on. Just don't do that. But apparently it was like common practice to get rid of dogs, if they had certain behaviors or, were bred by or kept by, people that maybe, quote unquote, should not have dogs. And again, that's kind of like a back and forth thing. Like, that's, in history, that's a very big box to open. And we don't really have that kind of time at the moment. But I figured that we could move on after our next commercial. And we're going to talk about the British Bulldog at the Siege of Yorktown. So, give us 1 minute with our commercial and we will be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. We were just talking about George Washington and the dogs that he took care of, the dogs that he created through crossbreeding different types of dogs. It was a pretty interesting take on it, even though he seemed very much so like a hypocrite by the end of this discussion, after we learned that he got rid of dogs that belonged to slaves because he felt endangered. So we're going to move on to another dog that goes unnamed, but it is a British Bulldog, and it's at the Siege of Yorktown. I would say that, this is America. We don't need to learn about the British Bulldog or anything like that. Well, here's the thing. History is not told in a vacuum, and, I imagine that the presence of a bulldog on the side of the British was also a way to really encourage, just morale, to be honest. And, I mean, the Continental Army had their own kind of, pets, and so did the Redcoats. So, for instance, this bulldog, was basically a dog that chased English cannonballs as they were fired over American trenches. And, just, I can imagine that happening with a dog, honestly. I'm trying to think of a show that had that happening, but either way, like, this dog loved to just try to catch those cannonballs. There's actually one rebel soldier named Joseph Plum Martin, who wrote in his diary that her officers wished to catch him and oblige him to carry a message from them into the town to his masters, but he saw American soldiers had been intimidated by him. So it's very interesting. Like, I look at pictures of bulldogs and I just kind of think, well, they're just adorable. I mean, they're not as adorable as French bulldogs, but definitely adorable. And I'm trying to understand what about this dog was so intimidating to them. Because, well, I just see this little face on this website and I just say, oh, look at that little blip that he has. Aw. Well, obviously this is not a picture of the actual dog, but definitely check out some pictures of bulldogs in general and you'll start seeing just kind of a very sweet looking dog, I'll have to say. And I think in the past, there's been a lot of stigma involving, bulldogs in particular, and of course pit bulls. And just, it's a frustrating thing that has happened in the past even. Like, something screams very intimidating to the soldiers of past to, about a bulldog. And you have to wonder. It's pretty interesting. But, like, the victory that the Continental Army had, and this was like this is the battle that decided who won the American Revolution. Like, the Continental Army, put an end to the war after Yorktown. That's when there was a very decisive surrender. Which, I mean, cool beans, that's pretty cool. I just kind of, again, wish, about how these dogs, could probably use a lot more attention. I'm not saying you have, like, an entire hall of, in the museum of military dogs. I mean, that'd be kind of cool, but it's just quite frustrating that we don't get enough information about these dogs. And I feel like there was something in the back of my head that I really wanted to talk about. But before I continue, I just want to apologize because, well, it's sometimes very hard to cover up the sounds of our neighbors shooting off fireworks in broad daylight at, let's see, right now for me it's 4:10. So, you can imagine that's frustration that I'm feeling right now. But in addition to that, I mean, the really interesting thing about, this dog in particular, like, he's chased after cannonballs. And, of course, there are loud noises, like weird flashes of light, all that kind of stuff. And this bulldog lasted. This bulldog, completely lived through the American Revolution, and it was fantastic to imagine. And I imagine that bulldog probably would not have a problem with, the fireworks going off in our neck of the woods, to be honest. But hey, that's kind of impressive. And poor thing Reggie, she refuses to go out these days because, well, loud noises. She does not like loud noises. She actually hides. She has a little corner now that she hides around, and she's been in there, several times since the fireworks have started. And just, I can't imagine this little girl, being a part of a war, support in a war. So, I'll say that Regina is more suited for running, jumping, and cuddling. And sometimes food. Because for some reason, every single dog that I've gotten is weird with food. I just don't know. At least Eisen has a healthy diet, somewhat. But anyway, just, again, it just kind of goes into, well, what kind of other dogs do we see that do very well in a very chaotic event, or just a battle even. But I just kind of, maybe they can make a memorial list of different animals that actually did something in the wars, honestly. So, that's just me. It could totally not happen and I'd be okay, I guess. But it would be nice to see that. And I feel like I have to just do one little check-in and just kind of explain that by the time that the fight came to Yorktown, it was basically the final battle. And again, the British had surrendered at that point. And, well, that was the end of the war, pretty much. And it's very interesting to see, like, where dogs have gone after that. For instance, I don't think we see many bulldogs in the army anymore. But, hey, it would be very interesting to see, like, what else do they have to say about this, about the dogs in general. And I'm trying to think also of, like, surely they had cats as, like, comfort animals too. I think I remember reading that for something in World War II, and it was kind of, like, amazing that this cat was able to really help the men when it came to, finding places to go so they're not poisoned, pretty much. But all of that's so cool, and I just, I want to meet a bulldog now. Is that okay? But I just kind of think that there is a type of dog that you gotta run into that is more than willing to be a part of this huge, war effort that, was going on back then. And, I mean, I should probably do some more research to see, like, what else happened with pets during the War of 1812. Because that's, pretty momentous in our history. But, I mean, I'm thinking of, General Jackson, and I just can't really, I don't know, reconcile with that, considering just the War of 1812. It really made him quite popular, it seems, and then he became president, and we then, like, ended up, like, taking over the Western world, or started taking over the Western world. So, I mean, there are definitely some interesting things. I don't even know if, Andrew Johnson actually did have any pets, which is interesting. But again, I don't know if, this bulldog would have much power to really, I don't know, to really be a part of an army. Because, well, I have Regina, and I had Rhodey. I also have Eisen. Cookie is pretty much deaf. Like, all three of those animals show a lot of fear when it comes to, like, loud noises, bright lights. They want to stay away from it. So, none of my animals could really join the military in some form. But they could definitely be, like, ways to help, soldiers with PTSD, I guess maybe they could be some help when it comes to concussion. It's great for relaxing. I imagine that different types of dogs yield different types of healing, if that makes any sense. And, I mean, it's so interesting. Like, I'm looking at pictures of bulldogs now, and I see nothing very intimidating by it. So it had to be a really big, scary dog to kind of scare the American soldiers at that point. But, hey, what do I know? But, yeah, the Siege of Yorktown was, like, basically the end of it. I probably should have listed this as, like, the last thing to talk about. But, hey, I was kind of interested in, what this dog did. And I guess it's kind of, pretty straightforward. We had a big intimidating dog that scared the Americans, and then end of story. But it seems like he did do a good job at, at just carrying messages to different individuals, like to his masters, for instance, just to share information, kind of like being an undercover agent is what I'm thinking. So I guess if we gave him like a little suit tie, or maybe like a soldier's fatigues or something, and just seeing him like walk around, be intimidating, send notes, take notes, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just, again, kind of weird seeing a bulldog instead of like one of those big fighting like dogs, I'd have to say. But anyway, what I want to talk about after this break is going to be very interesting. It is, where'd you go, man? Oh, Thomas Jefferson and his Briards. Now, I have to say that I was once introduced to Briards. There was a show, I think it was like Dennis the Menace, I suppose. But then I started kind of seeing more of it around in just movies in general, and memes too. So, I knew what the dog looked like, but I didn't know what it was called, and it's a Briard, so B-R-I-A-R-D. So, again, we will take a brief break, and, well, we'll start talking about Thomas Jefferson's dogs.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. And, well, just go ahead and say Eisen is still hiding in his little dryer place, and that's okay. But he probably didn't need to hear much about the very large British bulldog, for instance. So that's okay. But now, we're going to be talking about, definitely one of our founding fathers who has a bit of a very, sketchy past. But we will focus on his pets. But first I gotta share something. And that is, he was not a dog lover. In fact, he wrote this following letter to his friend, and I quote, I participate in all your hostility to dogs and would readily join in any plan of exterminating the whole race. I consider them the most afflicting of all follies for which men tax themselves. So, it's suspected that he has such a distaste for dogs in general because, well, maybe there were dogs attacking and killing his livestock whenever he was watching over the sheep when he was young. So there's definitely that. It's just kind of impressive that we don't know very much about that side of Thomas Jefferson. My opinion of him is, has changed a lot over the years. So, I'm not really, I not really going to say much about him, to be honest. But, well, about him and his politics. But, or social life. But he was actually kind of like the father of dog licenses. Like, he was wanting to have all dogs wear collars with their owners' names on them. And basically it was mostly to know who to blame when the dog misbehaved. It wasn't involving like, oh, this will help you find your dog. If you lost it, maybe someone will help you find him. No, it was specifically for behavior issues. And that's just amazing. We don't do that anymore we don't have that mindset anymore of that being like the forefront of why we add, like tags for your pets. And, well, now at least for my husband and I, we have like collars for Reggie and Cookie because, well, we don't want to completely lose them if they get lost. And we also have microchips, which you should probably do with your pets, in the next few weeks, because honestly, the fireworks will never stop, it feels like. But anyway, like, he had changed his mind on his dog, well, his feelings about dogs, when in 1789, and this name should sound familiar, Francis Marquis de Lafayette introduced him to, like, a shaggy, herding dog, and that is called the Briard. And Jefferson decided that, I actually kind of like this. And he said, and I quote, the finest house and farm dogs I have ever seen. So, there's something about the Briards that really stuck to him. And I kind of wonder why. But pretty much, the Briard was known as, like, a companion and working dog. Like, even in the 8th century in France. And it was definitely used for defending livestock against wolves and poachers, and then it became became as popular as a guard dog, in addition to it being a herder. So, gosh, I'm trying to remember what other movies do we see Briards in. I'll stew over that as I keep on chatting with you guys. But yeah, he did eventually start breeding Briards. Because, well, I mean, he was great friends with Lafayette, and he would just send, like, I think additional two more Briards so that Jefferson could start doing his own breeding, at his estate. Which, cool beans. I will say that the dogs guarded, Jefferson's flock of sheep. And it was, to him, it was a great companion, which is awesome, really. And then, he started pairing dogs for mating, and, he, in the end, said to friends to definitely take care of them because they can most definitely, destroy any livestock if they're hungry, pretty much. And that kind of makes sense to people. Like, you feed your dog so they don't destroy things. So in our case, if Regina wants to rip up one of my old rugs, well, the chances are she kind of wants food. And she has different behaviors for getting food and versus going outside to use the bathroom. So there's all of that up in the air. And I mean, definitely no records exist of Jefferson's dogs, like, living at the White House. But he did indeed bring in his mockingbird, named Dick. So, and Dick was actually allowed to, like, fly around in the president's office, just kind of enjoying, its merry little life. And it's just kind of a funny thought, just to think of him as just kind of having a bird, like, fly around his office. It sounds kind of interesting. I'm trying to remember. There was, like, a movie, too. I'm thinking about all these movies, and I can't remember the specific names, but I do remember that there was, like, another, like, mockingbird or canary that was, like, singing in in the background of a scene, and I just can't think of it right now. Anyway, I have to wonder, especially when you consider George Washington and his fear of his slaves' pets, or, dogs. And I kind of wonder, like, Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder as well. And, I mean, again, that's quite problematic, but, we need to think first about, well, what did he do with his slaves that did have dogs? Did he behave very similar to George Washington, or did he have some other way to handle these kinds of things? And I mean, I can imagine that it would be something like that, where you had like a lot of slaves that owned their dogs and who knew what I'm being quite sarcastic. It's like, oh, who knows what the slaves have taught that dog? And, it's a horrible way to think of animals, to be honest. And I just, especially, you start off with Jefferson, like, basically hating dogs in general, and he chooses, like, one specific breed to adore, and, like, all the other dogs are ridiculous and pointless. And that's the vibe that I get whenever I read through this research. And, well, just kind of moving more into this, like, if he did not like slaves' dogs, then the chance of him actually doing something terrible to the pets and slaves is very, I wouldn't doubt it, to be honest. And, I mean, George Washington was all about dogs, and he still thought about getting rid of them from the slaves. So all of this, it's just kind of a history lesson too, to be honest. I just can't really shake the disgust that I feel with Thomas Jefferson, especially since he was the guy that wrote the Declaration of Independence, and how exclusive it was. In addition to, the Constitution, which also did not really give much rights to the slaves, to be honest. And I just wish that the Briard had changed his heart completely. Because those dogs are absolutely adorable. They have long coats and they're very shaggy. Let's see, it has to be, like, a dog from, like, I don't know, maybe Family Circus. I'm trying to think about that, because, like, there's a type of dog that you can think about that. I am pretty sure that the dog was in Dennis the Menace, but, again, I will not say I know for sure. I could look it up, but, hey, I just want to talk to you guys, and maybe just kind of spitball some ideas. But, again, you have just more problematic individuals in history that somehow have misplaced their empathy for all instead of just the dogs. So, for instance, like, empathy for slaves versus empathy for dogs. And you kind of just think about that and how much little value they had in people at times. So, I just don't know. The really funny thing is, like, I'm looking up what a Briard is in particular, and, like, according to the AKC, apparently its temperament is confident, smart, and faithful, which all sound really good. I mean, I can understand why this initial introduction of this animal just kind of rang very close to Thomas Jefferson. I mean, like, weight is like 55 to 100 pounds, and its life expectancy is like 12 years. And, I mean, the group is basically herding, and that's pretty nifty, I guess. The one major thing that you have to consider about these dogs is that they're kind of a little bit high maintenance, and it's mostly because of its shaggy fur. Because if you see pictures of it, you'll see so much hair over their eyes, and they have a beard, and it's just a lot of hair, of fur. And because of this, they have that, like the soft undercoat below, like the outer fur. Like, when the undercoat starts shedding, then it kind of like could get stuck in the rest of the fur, and then hooray, you have like mats all in the body of your dog. And when I say mats, I'm not sure if many people are familiar with it, but mats are when you start getting like tangles that just kind of form into like little spots, like grouping of hair, like just kind of made and like kind of woven together, I guess you could say it like that. But yeah, it's those, if you don't have the time for that, then I would strongly suggest not to do that, to get a Briard, or any dog that has like the soft undercoat fur with long other hair. But again, this kind of makes me think of Thomas Jefferson, and I mean, didn't he seem to have a lot to do? He could always ask one of his slaves to brush the dog for him, but it's just, I can't imagine Thomas Jefferson taking the time to do that. And I'm not hating on Thomas Jefferson, I'm just kind of musing about what he might have been like as a pet owner. So it's just kind of like a difficult thing to imagine, for me at least. So now let's get started and ready for our break. And I just wanted to talk more on just our dogs in the American Revolution. I mean, the Briards are not technically a part of the American Revolution, but it did have different leaders during that time period. And I do want to talk about this very interesting thing, and John Adams' dog named Satan. Yeah, you definitely heard me right. His Satan dog, which is funny because we call Regina the demon baby, angel demon baby, because, well, she has like a little spot on her head that a woman said was like an angel's kiss. And we kind of joked about this with Regina because, well, while she is a sweetheart, she does get pretty demonic at times. Like, not to the point that, she can get in trouble. It's more of like, she gets so playful and excited that she's just kind of like a little demon. She's gotten better as she's gotten older, but it's definitely a thing that we still remember. So that's her nickname to us, among other names, like sausage. Anyway, we will talk about Satan, and we will be right back.
Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Back, and we were just talking about, let's see, Jefferson's Briards, and how strange it was that he was kind of won over by them. I don't really know what exactly was, important to him in a dog, but I mean, it takes a lot to get a dog that will be great for a person that doesn't like dogs. So, I wanted to kind of move on to this last individual, and I just have to ask one little thing, and it's, have you ever heard of someone giving their pet a strange name? Like, I've known some cats that are, I guess, given kind of mean names. I remember our neighbor was basically calling his cat stupid all the time, so I guess that's one example of, like, nicknames for your pets. But then it kind of goes into, well, what about anything that's stranger? And I can't really think of anything stranger than this one, and it's John Adams' dog named Satan. Yes, you heard me right. Satan. So, they had other dogs like John Adams and his wife, but, obviously, to history, Juno, who was their other dog, was Abigail's favorite dog. So, a lot of the times, she would write notes to, basically her granddaughter and saying that her grandmother must love the dog in addition to her. Anyway, the name Satan is kind of a bizarre thing for any dog, or it could just be that John Adams had a very, very, strange humor. You know, it was pretty metal for a man like John Adams to call a dog Satan. I mean, it's probably one of the more interesting things about him, to be frank. But anyway, there was really no evidence as to why this dog was named Satan. Like, there was a possibility that he was a very rambunctious little guy that just kind of received that name because he was kind of going all over the place, being very energetic, all that kind of stuff. And I guess that that was probably one of the more interesting names out of all of these pets that our presidents had, or just other people in general. Like, I had a neighbor a while ago that had named her dog Elvis, which is, I just don't understand that. But I can't be the one to judge about, names given to pets. I mean, I've never actually been able to name a pet. And when we first got Regina, my husband was, took the death of Rhodey pretty hard, and I figured that it would probably be, important for him to come up with a name, because I thought I was doing okay, and you know what, I've really worked through it, and I really like the name Regina, but it's like, Satan. Why? I'm just kind of floored by that. I mean, George Washington had one of his dogs named Drunkard. I mean, a lot of this is just crazy, and what possesses people to do that? I mean, Cookie is named Cookie. I would have never named a dog Cookie before. But despite that, I love her. And also for Eisen, well, that's a complicated story. He just kind of, my brother and sister took him in, and because they thought they wanted a cat, and then they decided, no, I don't want a cat. But that was after they named him Eisen. And that's an anime character from one of the shows of, like, I don't know, last decade or so. Either way, it was very interesting trying to explain what Eisen was to a ton of people. But again, it's not as weird as Satan. I honestly just think of, like, the picture that they have, or I don't even know if that's a picture of Satan, but anyway, anything that I see about this dog makes it seem like a very sweet and loving dog, and gosh, what exactly made him call, like, I'm at a loss here. I just kind of wish that I knew what exactly was going through their heads at the time. I mean, what is another weird name that I've run into? Beauregard. Yes. I mean, that's actually a nice name for a dog, and maybe, the most frustrating thing about Satan is that, you can't find too much information from him, and it seems like, John Adams' wife, Abigail, was the one that actually named both of those dogs. So it's not entirely clear about, the inspiration behind these. I mean, again, like, why would you name a dog a very mean name? For one thing. Again, I kind of wonder about how the dog's behavior was or anything like that. It just kind of strikes me as strange. And I could say that Satan wasn't really a part of the Revolutionary War, but his name would suggest that he would have done, I feel like it shows that he would have done well in battle, pretty much. But again, not all dogs are the same, and it's pretty much, well, what is in a name? Doesn't really, a name does not make someone a hero, right? It's the actions that make an individual a hero. And, well, there's not much information about Satan being a hero, right? But, maybe I'm just kind of wondering, maybe it's just kind of like a gag name where a lot of the joke is probably between John Adams and Abigail Adams. It could just be really, really funny stuff that we're not really sure how to really understand. It's just quite frustrating that you can't find information about Satan. And I know it's so frustrating because I'm going back and forth. It's like, oh, that seems like a cool name, and oh no, that's not a cool name. I can't even say for that time period, it was a good idea to give a dog the name Satan. But hey, they can do whatever they want. They are grown people, and well, John Adams at the time was president. So there you go. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to go over these pets because, well, they do show some significance in our history, especially the ones that were actually out in a battlefield, and then just kind of the cooling down of the war based on just sheer work and sheer efforts, pretty much. I just kind of wish that I knew more about Satan. Why? I mean, I could joke, I could just go into, a book and read about Satan. The internet is at my fingertips, right? So, I'll probably do a lot more research on Satan the dog, and not the devil, and see what else I can find about him, because, I mean, this dog can be quite interesting. It doesn't even say what kind of dog it was, which is funny because, well, let's see, for George Washington, there was definitely a type of dog that was involved there. Thomas Jefferson, he was obsessed with those Briards. And then you had, who are they? Oh yeah, it was the British Bulldog too that we're talking about. So most of those dogs that we have here are dogs that have been in battle. So it just feels so weird having a dog that hasn't really grown through war, I guess. And that should be a good thing, honestly. It's saddening whenever you hear of dogs at war, and, there are some that survive. Well, there are plenty that survive. It's just kind of a little change in the dog's personality, a lot of adjusting, and I just don't... I'm sorry, this just kind of goes back to my thoughts, why Satan? I don't know. But for the most part, I really do love the names that were given to these animals, and just kind of their recognition of animals for precedents of war, of heroism, all that kind of stuff. And I just, again, I wish that I knew why Satan was called Satan. God. I mean, it's exhausting right now thinking of that for me. I'm just like, please just show me the answer. And I guess I'll find the answer and maybe share it with you guys later on in the week. But, oof. It says over here, no evidence exists to suggest how Satan achieved his moniker. But whether it was because he is a particularly rambunctious dog or because John Adams was just completely heavy metal way before such a thing existed, it's certainly the coolest name among the president's dogs. And that's including George Washington's dog named Drunkard. So there's that. But I wish that I didn't see anything about cats, actually. Man, I might in the future talk about cats of war, because cats have been a part of different groups of men at war. I think I read one time that that there was a cat that would just kind of be a morale boost, and he'd kind of walk around in the trenches and, just kind of greet the soldiers that were just kind of resting at the time. So anyway, they had their little mascot, and I think that that'll definitely be in the future, I guess. Now, I have to go now because, 4th of July celebrations are waiting for me. But I'm sorry that Eisen was not here to, join us in the conversation, but he had some other things that he needed to do, like cuddle and, in a box or something. But anyway, I do want to thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Pets podcast. And again, we were brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would love it if you guys subscribed and reviewed. We love reviews from everyone. And as usual, you can check out our Instagram, our Twitter, and also our Facebook, just to kind of be a part of the journey of pets and, pets in the world. So, again, please, oh please, like, subscribe, share. We would love that. And, you guys have a wonderful night. Thank you.
You've been listening to the GSMC Pets Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.